Independent candidate RFK Jr. continues to make waves across the mainstream media. Let's listen to Joe Scarborough of Morning Hill going after him for helping Trump undermine Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. Let's watch.
Just a side note here on how much has changed and how Donald Trump has worked to reverse so many of the gains made since Martin Luther King's passing. We showed that extraordinary clip of Bobby Kennedy, and here we are 56 years later, a guy we both know, Bobby Kennedy Jr., running, as basically cover for Donald Trump. It's not a coincidence that some of Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s biggest contributors are Donald Trump's biggest contributors. So here we are all these years later, and just this twisted path has led us to where somebody named Kennedy is putting himself in a position to elect Donald Trump president, a guy whose life now is dedicated to reversing the work of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy.
I'm confused. Did I miss something? What about RFK Jr.'s behavior, his policies? I mean, there's plenty to critique, and that's fine. But what is it? What are his race policies that are so obviously in contradiction with Martin Luther King's legacy?
It's very simple. Let me help you. He's running for president, and that's all. And because he's running for president, maybe Joe Biden is less likely to be reelected, possibly.
The great segregationist and eulogizer of Strom Thurmond, Joe Biden. Anti-busing Joe Biden. This little girl is me,
Trump.
Joe Biden.
Oh, so you love Trump, huh? I get it.
Yeah, this is
racist Briahna hates Martin Luther King Jr.
So the implication here is that because some Trump supporters are RFK Jr. curious, and some, I'm sure, have donated to his campaign, that he implicitly ascribes to all of Trump's racial values, which are in contradiction, presumably, with Martin Luther King's values. This is incredible for a couple of reasons. One, this is defensive, obviously, because there is some perception that he is going to spoil the election for Joe Biden. That is not borne out. It seems very
up in the air. Yeah.
Who would be benefited from his presence in the race.
Right, and even the argument that he's attracted all these Trump supporters, Trump funders. Well, these are people who could have been giving that money to Donald Trump. So in some sense, the argument you're making is very self-defeating here.
Donald Trump, who was having some real financing issues.
Right, if he's similar-ish to Donald Trump, if that's what you're arguing, and I'm not sure that's the case, but if that's what you're arguing, then it would not be, then Donald Trump might not want him in the race. And in fact, it's not clear that conservatives do want him in the race. They're criticizing him very vocally because they perceive that, again, it's not clear from the polling. He's taking maybe more from Biden. That might not hold up. We don't know.
Moreover, his biggest donor is the woman who's now become his VP, who independently financed his $4 million Super Bowl ad and has contributed God knows what untold sums to his campaign effort, generally speaking. And she was someone who donated to Joe Biden in 2020. Yeah. So if anything...
But since then, she became a racist and decided to tear down what Martin Luther King erected. She had a dream. Little black children will be treated differently. I'm making fun of this because I selected this clip because it's so ridiculous to see how a mainstream media person thinks about a third party or an independent run. That it is getting in the way of having their preferred candidate, and to chalk it up to like the history of Martin Luther King to now, it's ending because there's a third-party candidate in the race. It's ridiculous.
Everything the Democrats don't like is racist. And I remember writing about this back in 2018 when I was working at The Intercept, because I started to see a pattern emerge in the kind of the post-Bernie movement era, where there was obviously all of this public appetite for these social programs that Bernie was talking about, and the Democrats' defense against that, because they can't just come out and say, actually, no, healthcare is bad. Actually, no, free college is bad. They would say things like, free college is racist because it would hurt historically black colleges and universities' ability to exist. I wish I can remember some of the examples now, but there was one that was like solar panels are racist somehow. I'm not even kidding you. These articles were written. And it is reflective of, I think, the Democrats' inability to negotiate the fact that they're occupying this centrist position, and all of their claims about who they are hoping to protect and whose interests that they are meeting are so superficial that all they have is the scaffolding of, oh, I'm nicer, I have good vibes about black people or gay people or what have you, but no material policies that would actually change the status quo. So you got to do things like say it's racist to have third parties.
Right, and never forget, always got to bring it up, these are the same people saying that democracy itself is at stake and on the ballot if Donald Trump were to become president, who at all times, if they're not explicitly working to limit your choices on the ballot in the election, are disdaining you or smearing you for considering some other choice.
That's right.
We got one more clip we wanted to get to, the candidate RFK Jr. sitting down with international broadcaster TRT for an interview, having this to say.
We've always had abundance of guns in this country. In the past 20 years, there's been no per capita increase in the amount of guns we have, and yet these killings, these mass killings, have exploded. And we need to look at, at other reasons for that as well, a potential reason. NIH has not studied the etiology or the causes of gun violence since 1996. And NIH needs to be studying them to see if there's connections to some of the SSRI and psychiatric drugs people are taking, whether there's connections to video games.
So wanted to just play this clip additionally because I am about to criticize RFK Jr. now, not because I think he's a racist or he's trying to go back in time and stop Martin Luther King Jr. from existing. Some of what he said I agree with. I too think it's not necessarily correct to just knee-jerk blame guns or the prevalence of guns or access to guns. And I do have some concerns about the level of prescriptions and antidepressants that young people are getting, whether that's actually good for them. I think that's not been fully explored yet or adjudicated by medical experts, so I'm not going to make bold claims about it, but I think it's all right to have some questions. It has been adjudicated or at least studied whether violent video games or violent media has anything to do with shootings, and the answer is unequivocally no. In fact, access to violent media is, if anything, detracting from real-world violence, because if your kid is playing video games or watching movies all day, they are actually less likely to be. That's a distraction from getting into trouble out in the real world. Not that that's necessarily a healthy thing, but is not a contributor to violence.
Yeah, I saw this clip and immediately thought of you, because I know that this is a bugaboo of yours that people keep
as a gamer. Yes,
make gaming responsible.
And Donald Trump's blamed it too, and a lot of prominent Democrats did and Republicans in the 90s. The whole kind of, again, it was a moral panic over TV and all that stuff. It's a little reminiscent to me now of some of the screen time discussion, although obviously there's it's very trendy right now to ascribe everything that's gone wrong with teenagers as them spending too much time on TikTok or whatever else. And I have, because of these past moral panics over TV and comic books and video games and frankly radio and the phonograph before that, I remain skeptical.
I always think during those conversations of this image I once saw from a newspaper from, I don't know, old-timey, early part of the 20th century or late part of the 19th century, that had a bunch of businessmen on the commuter rail going into the city in the morning, and they were all sitting in their booths with newspapers up. And the caption was something like, "Are newspapers ruining society? Everybody's got their head in their newspaper." And so it just feels like plus ça change,
Yep. Samuel Pepys, the guy who wrote a diary about the Great Fire of London in the 1700s, 1600s, sometime around then. He wrote in his diary that the pocket watch had just come out, and that same thing. Now no one's talking to each other. All the social interaction in society has ended because people just kept checking the time.
Okay, but have you met a watch guy? Because they're kind of like that. All right, stick around. We're rising for you right after this.